G'day team, Mr. Minimalism here for our weekly training tip. Today we're going to be covering off on posterior chain mobility. Now, over the last couple of weeks we've done a few mobility exercises, and these are classified as general mobility exercises. These are for people with an FMS score of 14 and above with no asymmetries. Now, if you do have dysfunctional movement patterns or need to rectify any issues, ensure you see an adequately qualified professional to come up with a corrective framework to suit your own needs. Now, a lot of these mobility stretches have been utilising the use of no equipment or as little equipment as possible. This is designed for the guys that are out and about that don't have access to your bands and so forth in the gym. But feel free to educate yourself further. Go seek the advice of a professional to see how to use bands and all that sort of stuff to increase your mobility and give yourself some more tools in the toolbox when it comes to mobility work. Now, posterior chain is obviously a massive group of muscles starting from the base of your foot all the way to the base of your skull here on the back side of our body. But the big name muscles we generally associate with our posterior chain is our glutes, hamstrings and lower back. Now, these can be tight for a number of reasons, but when we have a tight posterior chain, that usually affects our hip hinge movements such as our deadlift and our kettlebell ballistics, such as swings and snatches. Now, this can be identified by someone quadding the movement or using excessive quads or squatting technique throughout a movement that's meant to be hip hinge dominant. Now, today we've got three exercises we're going to use for our posterior chain mobility, first being the toe touch. For the toe touch, you're going to need a board or a plank to put under your toes and heels. But to start the stretch, we're going to test our range of motion for our toe touch. So we're just going to stand flat-footed, reaching up to the ground, shooting down to our hands and touching our toes, making sure we shift our weight to our heels to engage that posterior tilt to utilise our posterior chain mobility. Ensure to keep the knees locked, and if you can't reach your toes, you shouldn't be doing activities such as squatting. Now, to start our toe touch, we're going to start with our toes up on the board here. We're going to conduct 10 repetitions with our toes up, reaching up, knees locked, shooting down to our toes, keeping that spine in a neutral position as best possible, and touching our toes, stretching through our posterior chain. Once we conduct 10 reps on that side, we're going to come over to our heel raised position. We're going to do 10 reps of toe touches here as well, shifting that weight to the posterior, stretching through glutes, hammies, 10 repetitions. Now, to test how effective that was, standing flat-footed once again, reaching up, touching the toes or the hands to ground if possible. Next up, we have a really good stretch for activating our hamstrings, and it's more of your PNF type stretch, being proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which means stop and go type stretching. So we're going to go into the stretch and then we're going to back it off, returning to the stretch and increase our range of motion as we're moving. Okay, so to start this stretch, we're going to go down into the bottom of our squat position, anchor those hands underneath the feet, shift our weight to our heels so we don't overload our knees, and engage those lats to keep a neutral spine throughout the stretch. Then we're going to push up through our hips, stretching out our posterior chain as high as we can go, and then backing off the stretch back down into it. And pressing up into our stretch and backing it off. Every time you hit the top of the stretch, back it off and increase it on the next repetition. Now, we're going to keep this going for 1 to 2 minutes for muscle proprioception to occur and to really work lengthening of those hamstrings and your glutes throughout the movement. Ensure you keep those lats engaged to keep a neutral spine throughout the movement. Next up, we have our caterpillar. I've heard it called lots of things, inchworms, caterpillars. Let's just stick with what I know today. So to perform a caterpillar, we're just going to reach up like our toe touch, shoot down, touch our toes, walk it out into a push-up plank position, chuck in a push-up if you wish, and then we're going to pike our hips into the roof, and we're going to sweep our feet underneath ourselves. You can push up onto your fingers and your toes to get those feet nice and high underneath yourself, reaching up, stretching out, repeat the stretch. Now we're going to do that for a minimum of 10 repetitions. I like to also put a time value on it, say 1 to 2 minutes, where people really work on getting deep down. Your first one's going to be your roughest, and you want to finish with your best repetition. There you have it, guys, posterior chain mobility. Tune in next week for a training tip, and don't forget, less is more.